In a CNN town hall on Wednesday, former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper announced that he would suspend the death penalty in federal cases if elected president in 2020. Hickenlooper also answered questions regarding oil and gas development from another former geologist in the audience. David, did the CNN town hall help or hurt Mr. Hickenlooper?
Oh, who knows? It's way too early to say on that. I think I'm the only person at the table who has fought the federal government in a death penalty case, in the Jason Plow Supreme Court case, where I wrote an amicus brief on the side of the state of Rhode Island, which wanted to keep this bad guy in prison for life, and the federal government was trying to take custody of him so they could put him on a capital trial. But Hickenlooper's thing here, I think, is more signaling or virtue signaling than anything else. Although it certainly does show that he's resistance to enforcing the laws that have been enacted isn't just something that sheriffs and county commissioners and sanctuary cities do. He's running for president on that platform of not enforcing the federal death penalty that was enacted under President Clinton and enthusiastically signed by him. But it's also mostly symbolic. From 1927 to the present, there have only been 37 people executed under the federal death penalty. One of them in this century, there's only been 3. One of them was Timothy McVeigh, who murdered 169 people in Oklahoma City. Another was a guy who kidnapped, raped, and murdered a 19-year-old Marine recruit by bludgeoning her to death with a tire iron. And the other guy was a drug trafficker who arranged for the murder of 3 other drug traffickers, and that's what he was executed for, but he'd also killed 5 other people in other situations. And of course, Hickenlooper's the guy who spared the life of Nathan Dunlap, who murdered 4 people by murdering them at a Chuck E. Cheese. If that's what's in his conscience and he wants to run on, that's his right to do so.
Natasha, what do you think Michael Bennet made of Hickenlooper's town hall performance this week?
I'm sure he was taking notes and do's and don'ts, and I think there were some moments when Hickenlooper, really showed off his personality, and that went over well, and times where he showed off his personality, and that didn't go over as well. I'm thinking in particular the vice president comment, where they asked if he would, like other candidates, consider a female vice president on his ticket, and he had a very Hickenlooper answer. I think anyone who's lived in Colorado for a long time, he responded in the way he often responds to questions, and he started, it wasn't quite finished, and then it moved it to pivot into a different direction. And the pivot is where things went a little bit wrong. I heard George Brockler on radio yesterday say that he essentially mansplained why the commentator should ask that question of female candidates. CNN talked about there were sort of audible groans in the audience when he made this comment. And I think that was what I was seeing on social media immediately afterwards too. You're in this incredible moment. You have the nation watching, you have people having an introduction to you and your ideas. And at that moment to say that, it felt like the absolute wrong thing and just out of touch. I don't think it's what he meant to say. And I think what I'd like to do instead is sort of direct the conversation to the way that we treat female candidates when they're running for a political office, as both in the way the media treats them, but the way that there's discrepancies and inequities in the political system. And I think he could have gone in that direction. It just didn't come off quite that way.
And it seemed that the town hall was quintessential Hickenlooper because in Colorado we're used to this. It's kind of that quirky brand actually works really well here. How do you think it plays nationwide?
It's a great question. I mean, fundamentally, I think Democratic primary voters are looking for someone who can beat Trump. That's the goal, right? We have our policy differences. There are plenty of people who are dyed-in-the-wool Medicare for All supporters who won't support candidates who won't go really far to the left on the environment and issues that we find extremely important. But I think fundamentally we're looking for somebody who can win the White House in 2020. So I think Hickenlooper proved that he's a top or second-tier contender for that nomination with the town hall. The fact that he got one to begin with lets us know that the world is taking him seriously, and the fact that yeah, sure, he had a gaffe, but we're used to him having gaffes, and he's actually okay at playing them off. The substance of the town hall I thought was really good. He answered some really tough questions in really honest ways, and I think he came across great. It's hard to be funny in those situations, and he nailed a couple jokes, and I think people like that. We have to show the strongest contrast to Donald Trump we possibly can. And I think John Hickenlooper is an extremely strong contrast to Donald Trump. So if the question is, did he prove that he has the mettle to be a national contender? I think the answer is yeah, but I think the proof point comes in Iowa and New Hampshire.
Patty, what do you think? I'll ask you the same question I asked David. Did it help or hurt Hickenlooper?
I would say it's a wash. The woman gaffe was really not good, especially because they had just asked that question of Elizabeth Warren 2 nights earlier. So that was a gaffe, but it was a kind of a classic Hickenlooper, and then trying to retrench. What I thought he did very well on was the death penalty. We sat at this table when he made the decision on Nathan Dunlap, and people were talking about what a political decision it was or wasn't, and I thought that at the time was truly a vintage Hickenlooper decision that made no one happy except maybe himself, because he'd really measured it, and he talked to Archbishop Pugh, and he'd really thought about the inequity of how it had been handled. He'd really studied it. What I'm sorry we didn't do, and which now it looks like we will get, is have a long-term discussion of the death penalty in Colorado. So he acquitted himself well on that issue. He really showed how he was thinking, and now all of Colorado will probably get to do it because of the legislation that might come up at the Senate.